So, Housing Hawaii's Future is a statewide organization. My executive director and I were both based on Oʻahu, and we work very hard to come out to the neighbor islands whenever we can. We were just in Hilo for a talk story last month, and we hope to be out there very soon. We haven't been able to go over to Kona yet, but we know lots of folks in Kona want to talk story about housing policy too. So, with all that said, my presentation today is going to focus on notable housing legislation that's passed out of the legislature, that's been signed into law by Governor Green as of this month, as of July 2025. We know for a fact that the governor did not veto any housing legislation this year. Most of the legislation that I'm going to talk about today, it is signed into law. It is law. They're not just bills. If bills were vetoed, I'll make sure to mention that. My presentation will have two parts. So first, I'll talk about the laws that have been passed and signed, and then I'm going to talk about funding that's been appropriated for various housing initiatives through the state. Without further ado, I'll move on to the next slide. Just to set the stage, I'm going to talk about a lot of bills today. And please know that these slides will be shared out to everybody after this talk story session. I've made sure to link every single bill that I'm going to be talking about within this PowerPoint. So that way, after this presentation, if you want to go and look at a particular bill in more depth, you can just click on the link and you'll be able to get more information. This year, though, we had over 200 pieces of housing legislation get introduced in both the House and the Senate. A lot of ideas from a lot of different legislators, and not all of those ideas became law, but over 20 of those bills did in fact become law. Housing Hawaii's Future, we're not just a policy organization, we're not just a think tank, but we know that in order to impact housing and our chronic housing shortage here in Hawaii, we have to become involved in policymaking discussions at the local and state level. So for us, policy involves three key things. First, we look at what the problem is, what the needs are for housing. There's 1,001 different needs and lots of different subcategories of constituents when it comes to housing. Different groups within different AMI brackets or area median income brackets, and every county for that matter has different housing needs. We know, based off of studies that have been done over the last 20 years, one of the biggest barriers to affordable housing construction here in Hawaii is regulation. And so figuring out where we can retool regulations to make it easier to build affordable housing, that's what we do at the state and local level. And we don't just go in with a sledgehammer. We work very hard to talk story with as many people as possible. And if you know folks that we should be talking to, I know this is a coalition. Please know you can reach out to me. I'll make sure to put my email in the chat after this. We know that finding solutions to housing, it's not easy. Everybody loves to say that they want to deal with our affordable housing shortage, but often when it comes down to actually finding solutions, that's when there's lots of controversy. So policy, this is just a slide to outline that Housing Hawaii's Future, we don't just focus on policy, we also look at the different elements of our chronic housing shortage. What does it take, for instance, to get somebody qualified, local qualified, to get a loan to purchase a home here in Hawaii? What are the barriers facing developers and average everyday folks who are trying to get financing? What are the permitting barriers that folks face in the different permitting departments in every single county? That's the preface. Now I'm going to dive into the laws. And this can get very dry, so I apologize in advance. But please know that if you have specific questions about specific bills, this is the point where I'm going to start working through all the bills. So feel free to throw your questions in the chat. I'm going to go by subject area as I talk about the bills that have been signed into law this session. And I'm going to start off with transit-oriented development bills, because these are, in my opinion, some of the most important housing bills that have passed out of the legislature this year. In particular, the chair of the Senate Committee on Housing in Honolulu, Senator Stanley Chang, has said that House Bill 1409 is the most important housing bill to have passed out of the legislature this year. This bill ties funding through the Rental Housing Revolving Fund to transit-oriented development standards in our counties. What this means is that going forward, whenever affordable housing projects apply for funding through the Rental Housing Revolving Fund, HHFDC is going to factor the TOD standards of a community into whether or not that project receives an award. This is especially relevant to Hawaii Island when we talk about projects like Hualalai Court. Hualalai Court, for those that don't know, is in Hilo. It's about 100 units. Those sorts of projects and their availability to get funding in the future will be tied into how Hilo provides transit-oriented development opportunities. How does Hilo function as a walkable community? There's other bills too. House Bill 1298 is a program that establishes a government employee housing program. This is only for state government employees, not for county government employees, but the state wants to start building housing specifically for government employees. I'm honestly not too certain how this bill is going to work, but I do know that it's going to be focused primarily on Oʻahu, specifically near the Honolulu rail stations. There's also House Bill 800. This is an interesting bill. So there's been a lot of bills this session trying to do land exchanges, specifically on Oʻahu between the state and the county. Honolulu County wants to build housing on certain parcels. The state wants to build housing on certain parcels. This is all contingent on where transit-oriented development is going on Oʻahu. And for folks on Hawaii Island, I think this is especially relevant because these funding considerations impact how much housing funding goes to the neighbor islands. Another big topic this year concerned the State Historic Preservation Division. There was a lot of frustration this year from both the House and the Senate with how permits often get caught up at SHPD. And so as a result, several different legislators got bills passed out of the House and the Senate to compel SHPD to complete permit review on an expedited schedule. These are called shot clocks. So going forward, whenever a permit goes through SHPD for a housing project, SHPD through SB 66 will only have 60 days to finish getting the permitting approvals. And if they cannot get the permitting approvals through within 60 days, a permit is considered automatically approved. And if SHPD has trouble getting certain applications approved, certain permits approved, House Bill 830 now permits folks to actually get third-party reviewers to review their applications. A bill that I did not put up here is Senate Bill 15. So again, in total, there's about 5 bills targeting SHPD this year that have all been passed into law. SB 15 was almost vetoed by the governor. This bill, interestingly enough, amends the definition of a historic property because a lot of properties, especially older apartment buildings that need to be redeveloped, are currently turning 50 years old. And if you know anything about Hawaii and our old apartment buildings, they were all built in the 70s. So they're all becoming historic properties right now. The building I live in Aiea, it was built in 1975. So as of this year, legally, it is a historic property. And if this property is ever redeveloped, that means that anybody applying to develop on this parcel, the parcel that I'm living in currently, is going to have to go through SHPD. And that's just another regulatory burden impacting our ability to construct housing. Also talk for a minute about land use and consumer rights. These two topics aren't necessarily related to one another. I just didn't know how to organize them. But right now, within the state of Hawaii, there is a recognition that we have different priorities. We have priorities with regards to our ability to be food sufficient, our ability to really enjoy food sovereignty, grow our own food. There's demands that we build enough affordable housing. Right now, there's a mandate that we need to build 22,500 affordable rentals by the end of this decade. There's another mandate that we need to be energy self-sufficient by the year 2050. We have lots of different mandates, and those mandates end up targeting agricultural lands indiscriminately. And so Housing Hawaii's Future, we tracked House Bill 778 this session. This bill is going to push for what's called an integrated land use study to look at which agricultural lands need to be protected, which agricultural lands need to remain in cultivation, and whether certain agricultural lands should be turned over to the Department of Land and Natural Resources for conservation, whether they could be potentially rezoned for housing, or whether they could be suitable sites for solar. This could be a very controversial bill, so that's why I'm flagging House Bill 778. One of the most popular bills to come out of this session, regardless of housing, one of the biggest bills this session was House Bill 420. House Bill 420 targets lawyers from the mainland who are known to sue projects before they even begin construction, often with frivolous lawsuits that claim that the projects are in some way, shape, or form defective. What they're doing here when they engage in these frivolous lawsuits is they try and get developers to settle, um, provide payouts to these attorneys and their plaintiffs before the project even begins construction. Often these costs can impact the ability for a developer to even begin construction. And so the end result is a frivolous lawsuit and no housing. House Bill 420 is intended to mediate these claims and prevent frivolous lawsuits. And this could actually end up really helping our developers, our affordable housing developers who have to engage with these lawsuits. I'll mention Senate Bill 332 here. Senate Bill 332 is targeting Lahaina. Right now, there's a lot of foreclosures happening in Lahaina, folks who have been impacted by the wildfires of August 2023. They're currently having to foreclose their homes. And when lots of people have to foreclose on their homes at the same time, suddenly banks own lots and lots of land in places like Lahaina. And SB 332 is intended to prevent what's called block auctions, where lots of properties are put into these big pots, if you will, and the pot of properties is auctioned off through a single auction. This doesn't benefit locals. It doesn't benefit residents. It benefits oftentimes investors or real estate investment trusts, folks who are looking to engage in speculative behavior. SB 332 is intended to prevent that kind of activity. And we're hopeful that, it'll help maintain local ownership over in Lahaina. This is important to everybody in Hawaii, in our opinion. Financial reform. This is the nerdiest slide that I could talk through in this presentation. So to be very candid with you, I'm not going to talk through it very much. But what I am going to do for all of you is I'm going to point out that I did link on the bottom of this slide to a presentation that Senator Stanley Chang, the chair of the Housing Committee, and gave alongside Representative Luke Evslin, the chair of the House Committee on Housing. They talk through very effectively and very efficiently what all three of these bills do to help provide more financing for folks who are looking to fill what's called gap financing when they're trying to make affordable housing projects pencil. Senator Chang himself said that he doesn't completely understand these bills. It's always interesting when legislators admit that they don't completely understand the bills that they're trying to get passed through the legislature, but folks like the Hawaii Housing Finance Development Corporation, the state agency that's charged with helping private developers build housing, whether that's nonprofit developers or for-profit developers, they're the ones often pushing for these financial reforms, these financial tools to help developers make their projects pencil. While that might have been the most boring slide, this next slide talks about all the regulatory reforms, all the notable regulatory reforms that made their way through the legislative session this year. Certain regulatory reforms are intended to remove fees that often don't serve any purpose other than to add on to the cost of housing. A great example is the school impact fee. The school impact fee is often applied to affordable housing projects, even government projects, to the tune of about $2,000 to $5,000 per unit for a project. And those costs are often passed on to potential renters and potential owners, often local renters, local owners. House Bill 422 targets the school impact fee to now exempt all government housing developments, affordable housing projects, DHHL housing from having to pay school impact fees. That brings down the cost of those projects, and that benefits local residents. Another bill I'll point out is House Bill 735. This bill is targeting a lot of our rural communities over on Kauai, over in Maui, over on Hawaii Island that still have to rely on septic tanks. Right now, the Department of Health has certain rules with regards to septic tanks. You'll often have to have multiple septic tanks if you have multiple dwelling units. This law clarifies now that you can have multiple dwelling units under a single septic tank, but if and only if there's no more than 5 bedrooms among those different dwelling units. This is intended to bring down the cost of maintaining septic tanks or cesspools as time goes on. We could talk through House Bill 732 is another bill targeting Lahaina. Senate Bill 38 is legislation intended to target counties who often add on requirements for affordable housing projects that go through 201H exemptions. This bill was almost vetoed. To be completely candid with you, Housing Hawaiʻi's Future asked the governor to consider not vetoing this bill, and luckily it was not vetoed. We felt Senate Bill 38 was important because oftentimes counties, especially here on Oʻahu, they'll add on more requirements for 201H projects. And sometimes those requirements bring up the cost per unit of a housing project. They drive up the cost of the project itself. And in an environment where we're dealing with really high interest rates and uncertain supply sources for a lot of our construction building materials, we don't feel that the counties are using their powers very responsibly. So again, if we want to talk through any more of these bills, happy to do so. I'll point out lastly, House Bill 1406 was a bill pushed by Hawaiʻi Representative Gregor Iligan. It's a statewide permitting task force that's going to look at all the different permitting processes housing projects have to go through. And I'm not too certain what it's going to be focused on per se, because that's a really tall order for a state task force to tackle. But I do believe, and I just spoke with Representative Iligan, they're going to plan on convening this task force sometime around September. So be on the lookout for that task force. And then these are just resolutions. One resolution I'll point out, it legalizes single stair construction for lower density apartments. You might not think this matters, but it actually drives up the cost of lower density apartments. And oftentimes lower density apartments are affordable housing projects. Right now, Honolulu County permits lower density apartment blocks to have single staircases. Other neighbor island counties, however, often do not permit single stair construction for lower density apartments. Again, this drives up the cost of housing in a very strange way. But if you're interested in stairs and how it impacts the cost of housing, check out HCR 66, HR 60. All right, so hopefully some of you are still awake, and if not, don't worry, you can go back later and click through these slides, click on the links, learn a little bit more about these bills. I'm now going to talk through what are called the capital improvement project funds, or the appropriations that have been made through the state budget bill. This is a single bill that basically decides how much the state is going to invest in housing on a biennial basis. Our state budget system operates on a 2-year timeline. So this year, House Bill 300 was the state budget bill. It's been signed into law as Act 250 SLH 2025. Really long bill, but if you want to learn about how the state works in a very fast fashion, honestly, it's a really interesting bill to check out. Lots of major appropriations were made for infrastructure to support housing, specifically TOD housing. There's also some funding this year for homelessness, and then just some general appropriations for the various housing agencies that exist in the state of Hawaiʻi. That includes the Hawaiʻi Community Development Authority, the Hawaiʻi Housing Finance Development Corporation, the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, the list goes on. So I don't have a good way to really organize all the appropriations. I did my very best, though, to try and organize them in a somewhat understandable and digestible fashion. A lot of these capital improvement project appropriations, they're often directed at specific tangible projects that need funding. A lot of these projects, I'll admit, they're not focused on Hawaii Island. There's only one project here that is focused on Hawaii Island, and that's Lanakila Homes over in Hilo. It's $4.2 million in pre-development funding for planning for public housing in Hilo. And that's part of the Kolemomi agenda, which is currently being pushed by Hakeem Unsafi. He is the executive director of the Hawaii Public Housing Authority. In case you don't know, the Hawaii Public Housing Authority is presently trying to go beyond its traditional responsibilities. And by that, I mean through House Bill 1093, they're now getting into the business of building mixed income, non-public housing. And this is very innovative because if anybody knows the history of public housing, it segregates poor people. And that's not fair. That's not right. We know from studies nationally and internationally that when you mix people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, it leads to more holistic communities, greater community equity. And that's what benefits communities, not segregating the poor. So HB 1093 is honestly a really innovative bill. It shows that the Hawaii Public Housing Authority is taking a very novel approach to public housing. They call it social housing now. But SB 65 appropriates $20 million to restore vacant, dilapidated housing across the state, HPHA housing. A lot of the funding here, though, it's targeting public housing on Oʻahu. So if you want to learn more about how HPHA projects in Hawaii Island are getting funding, I'd encourage you talk story with your legislators, try and learn more from them. Because frankly, right now, I only see that $4 million going to the Lanakila Homes project over in Hilo. I don't see many other projects taking shape right now through HPHA over on Hawaii Island. I'll next talk, I'm going to turn back to transit-oriented development appropriations. The state is going all in on transit-oriented development housing. Right now, Senator Stanley Chang is through this 99-year leasehold model that he's trying to push. He's doing one project right now in Kaka'ako. Next time you guys are in Kapiolani Avenue, there's a famous mural of Barack Obama. And there's a Jack in the Box there. It's probably the most busy Jack in the Box in all of Honolulu. That's all going to disappear, and they're going to be putting in a 99-year leasehold project there, an apartment. And we'll see how that sells, because if that program goes well, we might be seeing more state-financed 99-year leasehold projects in the future. But in any event, they received $15 million this year. The state's also investing heavily in the Kalihi district in West Honolulu. They're going to be investing more heavily in infrastructure in that region going forward. And this could be instructive for folks in Hawaii Island who are thinking about what the urban renewal of Hilo might look like, for instance, or what transit-oriented development could look like in Kona. But again, I'm just flagging these things. Lastly, UH renovation. Mānoa is receiving over $120 million for student housing. Arguably in Honolulu, a lot of the housing shortage is driven by out-of-state students renting, taking up a lot of the housing stock within the Mo'iliili, Macaulay districts of Honolulu. I'd be curious if you guys think that UH Hilo needs more funding for student housing. Just a question to throw out there. We're almost done. We're almost done. These are other blanket appropriations been provided. Oh, I already mentioned the UH renovation earlier on, but DHHL only received $20 million this year. House Bill 606, I'll flag that bill here. House Bill 606 wanted a lot more money for DHHL this year, but that bill was ultimately deferred. The legislature wants to see DHHL's projects come online before they commit to funding DHHL further. So for right now, that $20 million that went to DHHL is really just to help DHHL renovate and rehabilitate existing housing stock. They did not receive any funding this year to expand their housing stock. The Kauhale model, the Ohana Zones program, building tiny villages for houseless folks, that program has been officially established. And by that, I mean it's now permanent. The state is still looking to expand Kauhale operations, especially to the neighbor islands. Right now, it's been historically concentrated only on Oʻahu, but I think they personally feel that the model, the proof of concept, is now well established enough on Oʻahu to expand it further. If you guys want to talk further about the rental housing revolving fund, happy to talk through that further. That's $200 million of money that goes towards the supposed development of affordable rentals, but oftentimes that money gets tied up by the fact that there just aren't enough shovel-ready projects eligible for that form of financing. I'll end on this note here. Thanks for sitting through this. But one thing Housing Hawaiʻi's future is continuing to look at are deed restrictions for the state of Hawaii. And by that, we mean we recognize that there is a need for a residents-only, some might call it a locals-only housing market. And over in Maui County, this program was actually just established. Their mayor just signed a deed restriction program into law over there. Deed restrictions have the capacity to replace inclusionary zoning. By that, we mean we only focus on qualified locals without discriminating on the basis of their income. Happy to talk through this program a little more, but if you want to learn more about it, House Bill 739 would have been the mechanism to establish a statewide deed restriction program this year. It made it all the way through the House. It almost made it through the Senate, but ultimately some Senate leaders questioned the cost of this program. Um, but again, we think that this could be a really novel way to prevent housing from falling out of our local market, falling into the hands of out-of-state investors. We think that ideas like this need more discussion here in Hawaii. With that said, though, if you guys ever have any ideas, if you want to talk about any policies that you think deserve more attention, please know that Housing Hawaiʻi's Future, we talk regularly to a lot of our legislative leaders in Honolulu, who are already drafting housing bills, housing legislation for the 2026 legislative session. That's 6 months away, but people are already drafting bills. We're already drafting bills. So if you have ideas, please let us know. If you want to learn more about Housing Hawaiʻi's Future, feel free to scan that QR code, follow us on our socials.